All right. So one of the challenges that I have faced throughout my entire career, and as a structural correction doctor, but also as a functional neurologist, is patients who have progressed to the point where they're ready to end their lives because how bad things are, and there's an infinite number of possible reasons why they got there, why they've arrived there. Many at the beginning of my career, it was structural. The patient would have severe pain over a long period of time, and there's an interesting thing in pain because there are different kinds of pain, and you can have pain. In fact, if I ask my staff what we do here, or if you ask them what we do here, they'll tell you we do suffering. We're here to alleviate suffering. Pain, you can have a pain of a 9 or a 10 and a suffering of a 2, and you can be handling it. You could be okay. But you could have a pain of a 2 over a period of 2 decades, and you could have a suffering of a 10, and you could be ready to end your life, even though the pain isn't nearly as bad as the person with the 10 pain. But the emotional side of pain is so much worse, and that's where opioids come in. Opioids really are less painkiller and more suffering killer. They activate the limbic brain, and they help the limbic brain to experience less, to perceive less of that suffering, we'll call it, rather than pain. And that's why when they took away opioids from people, or what they were doing it regularly anyway, right? You go to a pain specialist, whatever that means, right? I think that when the doctor says to you, I'm going to send you to a psychiatrist and a pain specialist. Well, the psychiatrist basically is sending you there because you're nuts, right? You can't handle your pain. Wham. And so then he's sending you to the pain specialist because you're a wimp and you can't handle your pain. And my comment always is, which is it? Is it all in my head, or is it all in my body and I'm just a pansy? You tell me, why don't you know whether it's one or the other? And that, so they don't, because they don't. And the pain specialist will start you on meds, and very often he's going to start you on opioids. And opioids are going to wind up teaching you the lessening of the pain and the lessening of the suffering especially. Well, while you're doing that, you're still firing the pain and you're still firing the suffering, you're just sedating it. The real issue is the pain system is still growing, not just going, it's growing. They call it chronic pain. I don't like the term. I like the term learned pain, or the neuroplasticity of pain. You're becoming more and more effective and more efficient because you keep driving that. Even though it's sedated, you're driving it, and it's becoming more and more efficient through the concept of neuroplasticity. And so when we stop doing the meds, it's even worse. Why? Because it grew. The system grows. If you read a lot of books on a certain subject, you're going to get really good at it. You're going to learn because the brain is going to change to facilitate those activities that you did. The brain always wants to change and to respond to whatever stresses it's under. And so the pain gets worse, but then all of a sudden the pain doctor says, you're addicted. And you say, addicted to what? You say, addicted to opioids. Oh, you mean the ones you gave me? That's like a drug pusher, right? What, you want me to pay more? Is that it? Well, they take away the opioids because they say, well, I'm going to lose my DEA card. I'm not going to be able to prescribe anymore, or maybe even go to jail and that. Well, then here's the other issue that is never talked about, and it's really saddening because we've known about it for a long time, that opioids are an immunosuppressant. So all the while you've been dealing with this pain and making a better pain system in it, you've also been dysfunctioning in your immune system. And as you've been dysfunctioning, you've been creating an autoimmune disorder that's been suppressed by the opioids. So now that we take it out, you've got pain, you've got suffering, and now you have an raging autoimmune, which is a global inflammatory process that you didn't have. Well, when it got really popular to take away the opioids, when we had our politicians practicing medicine without a license, which I think is interesting, when they took them away, the new medications under the pharmaceutical companies had already prepared for that mysteriously, and in it, when they took them away, the drugs that they supplanted it with, that they substituted, were immunosuppressants. So that means they knew what was going on, and they could charge significantly more than for the opioids. So I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying it's a conspiracy. So this will probably be taken down soon. But in that creates such an issue that many of those patients were at the edge of suicide. So what is it that is caused that creates that kind of abnormal, not just abnormal thinking, but abnormal wiring? Because the brain is wired in a certain way, but it changes. And we talk about structure versus function. The circuitry within your computer is consistent unless you add circuitry to it. Whereas our circuitry is constantly changing to respond to the needs that you're currently placing on it. The stimuli is forcing a change. And so the brain is changing. In fact, this is a study from University of the Feinberg, Department of Physiology, Feinberg School of Medicine, Northwestern University, Chicago, Illinois. And they did a study relating to chronic pain and how it affects the brain. And in it, the final conclusion was, this is the first demonstration of brain function disrupted by chronic pain. The brain of a chronic pain patient is not simply a healthy brain processing pain information, but rather it is altered by the persistent pain. So you're creating an abnormal machine as a result of the pain. And so now you have a dysfunctional brain. And imagine if you've got software and hardware, and the brain is the hardware, but it can change. And as it changes, it becomes less compatible with any software that's working in the system. And so we could be dealing with all kinds of mental and emotional issues that are the software, and then because of the chronic pain changing the brain, now it's even harder to run that software. And so now we've arrived at a position where the patient is not who they were. Think about that. When you look at brain science and what the brain is and what it does, we have a brain because we move. Therefore, the environment changes. We move to different places and we respond to the new needs of the environment. That's why we have a brain. In that, our brain is a predictive mechanism. And that prediction that it makes is through the experiences of the past. And then it responds. So you've got information coming in, you have an integration and a casting of meaning on what it sees, and then a response, which is a motor output. Well, when I was a kid, I would hear my mom say, "Don't you even think about it." And I'd say, "What?" And she'd say, "You're going to hit your brother." And inside I'm going, how did she know? Well, she saw the look on my face, and she had seen that so many times that I was getting a sense of joy and glee with just the thought of how much I would enjoy hitting my brother. And so she saw it, and she responded by heading it off at the pass. And so that predictive mechanism, according to neuroscience, is your personality. I'll let that sink in. Your personality is your predictor. And so let's say we affect the predictor. Let's say we affect the predictor just from an injury, from a brain injury. And I always hear, when somebody's brought in from a brain injury, I always hear from the family, he's not the same person he used to be before the accident. Say, it has to be different because we damaged the predictor. And so it's not the same predictor it used to be. And so, and it doesn't matter how that happened. It could be a 30-year chronic pain that changes the predictor, but it's not the same predictor it used to be 30 years ago. And so my job is to put the predictor back together again. Sometimes when I'm dealing with autoimmune that's involved, it's also continuously damaging the predictor. And so I have to stop. It's like kind of like the house is on fire and we're trying to rebuild the house while it's still on fire. We got to stop the continuing damage, put out the fire. So we have to stop the autoimmune, not just turn off the alarm and not just do the rebuilding. I got to, priority one is put out the fire, stop the autoimmune. Then number two, stop anything that may re-trigger the autoimmune, because that global inflammatory process attacks everything in the body. We say, well, he's got Hashimoto's, so it's his thyroid. His thyroid is getting attacked. Yes, it is. And it's the thing that's showing up. It's the thing that was the weakest, but it's attacking everything else. And that's why people with autoimmune eventually wind up with another autoimmune. Well, no, it's the same autoimmune. It's just that something else succumbed to it. So, but that whole process creates a different brain, a dysfunctional nature of that brain, and then we have to run the software, and usually, because the brain doesn't operate the way it used to, it goes through a downward spiral, a downward winding. We call it wind down. And so if we've got that effect of, let's say I've got a high functioning right brain and a less functioning left brain, and because they help each other, because this one is weaker, this one begins to drop down because it's helping this one function. Then it drops down. Now this one isn't driving this one near as much as it used to, and it drops down. And then the same thing happens over and over again. But the way we see it is, it's actually a wind down. And that's when I'm working with a patient, I want to see it start to wind up. I want to see, as I affect this, I want to see this come up. And then as I affect this, I want to see this come up. But most of the time I'm focusing on just the weak side until the strong side says, I need more juice to help this one grow some more. And so that's how we function that. But in my job, in taking care of patients, putting their predictor back together again, their personality back together again, and that there's often times where I have to deal with the software side of the problem, and there could have been issues from their past that they need to deal with, that they need to function. And that's where we're going to get into talking about things like PTSD and that. So, but seeing that and this is one of the biggest things I learned in becoming a functional neurologist, you cannot judge anybody. You have no idea what's going on in their brain or their mind. And when you look at an individual, you're looking at a compilation of everything they've ever experienced, everything that they've ever done, but also everything that's been done to them. Everything that all the positives and negatives, all the sorrow, all the pain, all the joys and the happiness have gone into becoming who they really are. And so when you're working with somebody who is struggling with thoughts of hurting themselves, of harming themselves, there are real reasons behind it. And the longer they go through that, the longer they experience it, the more the brain changes. Because function dictates structure, and structure dictates function, which becomes that downhill loop. The expression, we call it depression. The opposite of depression is expression. And when you're in a depressed mode, you don't want to express. You don't want to move. You don't want to get out. You don't want to see sunlight. You don't want to. That's understandable, but that's a major part of the answer.